Welcome to VLearn, Virtual Learning Network. This is session number 24th of the subject India Earliest Times to the 8th Century AD, and the chapter is Expansion and Network of Trade and Urbanization. Topics to be covered are Introduction, Geographical Background, Political Framework, Expansion of Trade and Production of Commodities, Role of Religion in Trade, and Position of Traders. Introduction. The number of cities increased, and these now combined political and commercial functions. There was a greater use of brick both for residential structures as well as for fortifications and public buildings. The early trade routes gained more importance under the Mauryas. There were two reasons for this: gold, gems and diamonds mined in the Deccan and transported along trade routes were required to sustain the royal treasury. The state derived revenue by taxing the traders and hence encouraged trading activity. So as and when the number of cities increased now and also the political and commercial functions increased, there was a greater use of brick both for residential and public buildings, and the trade routes gained more importance under the Mauryas, and there were two reasons for that: gold, gems and diamonds mined in the transport. They were also transported along the trade routes and they were required to sustain the royal treasury. The state derived revenue by taxing the traders and hence encouraged trading activity. Geographical background. Some aspects of the geographical features are significant from a historical point of view. The two major river systems that dominate the northern part of Indian subcontinent are those of the Indus and the Ganga. The Ganga river system is very different from that of the Indus, and that has influenced the location and growth of settlements in the north. The Ganga rises in the Himalayas, and in its journey to the Bay of Bengal, it receives the waters of many tributaries along the way. These tributaries such as Yamuna, Gomati, Ghagra, Gandak, etc. add to the flow of water in the Ganga. So the Ganga river system, that is very different from the river of Indus, and that has influenced the location and growth of settlements in the north. And the Ganga, basically the Ganga rises in the Himalayas and also receives the waters of many tributaries along the way. Political framework. A review of the political situation in North India is essential as it is linked to one of the questions that we shall discuss later in this unit. Who controlled trade? Was it controlled by kings and rulers, or was it in the hands of traders and merchants? You've seen earlier that under the Mauryas the center of power was Magad, but with the decline of the Mauryan dynasty, Magad lost its prime position and many centers of power developed in the subsequent period. The Ganga valley, especially Magad, continued to be ruled by the Sangas and later by the Kanvas till the beginning of the Christian era. So the trade, it was ruled by kings or the rulers or the traders as well as the merchants, but till the Mauryan dynasty, when it was declined, the Magad also, which was its prime location, that also lost its importance, and many new centers of power emerged during the subsequent period. Expansion of trade and production of commodities. One of the questions that rises is, what were the reasons responsible for the increase in trading activity in the post-Maurya period? What were the reasons which were responsible for the increase in the trading activity? There is no single answer as there are many reasons for this increase. Agriculture was now generating enough surplus. There was increase in trading activity in the post-Maurya period as agriculture was now generating enough surplus. It was giving enough harvest or produce. Next is both Buddhism and Jainism, which had a large following by now, encouraged the accumulation and reinvestment of wealth, and trade was one of the occupations held in high regard. So both Buddhism and Jainism, they had a large following by now, and they encouraged the accumulation. They encouraged the accumulation and reinvestment of wealth and trade was one of the occupations held in high regard. So both Buddhism and Jainism, they had a large following, and they also encouraged the accumulation, and whatever accumulated wealth was there, that has to be reinvested, and that was held in high regard. The expansion of urban centers meant that there was a growing class of consumers for subsistence as well as luxury goods. So there were a lot of expansion, growth in urban centers, growth in the urban cities, which meant there was a growing class of people, of customers, of consumers for subsistence, for livelihood, as well as also for luxury goods as well as for necessity goods. So they were both for subsistence as well as for the luxury goods. A class of consumers was growing. Internal trade. While literary sources such as the Milind Panho and the Jatakas provide information on the organization of trade networks, further confirmation comes from archaeological artifacts such as coins, seals and sealings. So some sources like the Jatakas provide information on the organization of trade networks. Further confirmation comes from the archaeological artifacts such as coins, seals and sealings. The Milind Panho was written about the beginning of the Christian era. The original text is now lost and the present work is a Pali translation of the copy made at a very early days in Sri Lanka. Also written in Pali, the Jatakas are 500 in number and narrate stories connected with the previous births of the Buddha. External trade. We've mentioned earlier that maritime trade started during the Mauryan period. The early links flourished and expanded in the early centuries of the Christian era. So the early links, they also flourished and expanded in the early centuries of the Christian era. One reason for this was the demand from the two major empires that arose at the beginning of the Christian era. So one reason for the expansion of the early centuries of the Christian era were the demand from the two major empires that arose at the beginning of the Christian era. And in the west was the mighty Roman Empire, while in the east was the Han Empire in China. So they also started increasing their empire, the Roman Empire as well as the Han Empire in China. And information about the period is thus available in many foreign sources. About this period, information is available from many of the foreign sources, and also maritime trade was also started during the Mauryan period, which also led to the growth and development of external trade. Principal trade routes. Bactria and the Oxus Valley in North Afghanistan was the main center for the international trade with Central Asia and China. From this city, a route ran through Kapisa and the Kabul Valley to the core region of the Kusana Empire. Within the Indian subcontinent, there were two major routes mentioned in the different sources. The Uttara Patha or northern route connected the major centers of the north, while the Dakshina Patha linked the centers of peninsular India. So principal trade routes were within the Indian subcontinent only. There were two major routes which were mentioned in the different sources. The Uttara Patha or the northern route that was connected with the major center of the north. Also the Dakshina Patha linked the centers of peninsular India. Urban centers. We get information about the urban centers of North India from descriptions found in early Pali and Sanskrit texts, but many of these descriptions are of a rather general nature. The best sources for the purpose, however, are archaeological excavations conducted at the important urban sites. These tell us in detail about the way the houses were constructed and the implements and other artifacts used by the people who lived there. So the best sources for the information were the archaeological excavations which were conducted in the urban sites, and also these tell us in detail about how the houses were constructed, how was the houses planned, and what were the implements, artifacts, the tools which were used by the people who lived there, and also what was descriptions of a general nature, and also the descriptions found in Pali and Sanskrit texts. Role of religion and trade. A major center was a region around Taxila where several Buddhist monasteries were located. Here a distinct style of art known as Gandhara art developed under the Kusanas. A second stronghold of Buddhism was the region around Mathura, which was equally famous as a center of art also. So Gandhara art was famous under the Kusanas, and a region around Mathura also that was also famous center for art. Here, however, both Buddhism and Jainism were patronized, and excavations have unearthed both Buddhist and Jain monastic remains. Another large Buddhist center was at Sanchi Pir Pri Stay, Bhopal. Position of traders. Brahmanical texts in Sanskrit of the early centuries AD divide society into four categories, that is Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaisya and Shudra. Agriculture and trade were generally prescribed to the Vaishya, though the profession of the artisan was associated with the Shudra. As contrasted to this, early Buddhist texts refer to a variety of ways in which society could be divided. In addition to the Varna or caste hierarchy, they also mention distinctions on the basis of work and craft. Here the division is on the basis of high and low. Agriculture, trade and cattle keeping were considered high work. So agriculture involved in agricultural activities, trade and cattle keeping, they were also considered high work. And in addition to the Varna or the caste hierarchy, the distinctions are also there on the basis of work and craft, but here the distinction is on the basis of high and low. So that was all about the urban centers, how they expanded, what were the reasons why they expanded, and demand for necessity as well as luxury goods that led to the increase and expansion of the urban centers, and role of religion in trade, and how the centers of art also flourished under the rule of the Mauryas, and how the trade networks, how the communication networks that also started increasing during that time. So these are some of the questions. You have to do it yourself. Question number 1, how would you account for the increase in trade in the post-Mauryan period? Write in 100 words. And question number 2, according to the Greek text Periplus, which were the items imported into and exported out of India? That's all. Thank you. Happy learning. We learning.